It was 11:47 p.m. on a Friday when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't pick up. I was already in bed, half asleep, still in my scrubs because I pulled a double at the clinic and hadn't even had the energy to change. But I saw it was St. Let, Catherine's, the hospital 2 towns over, and something made my stomach drop before I even answered. Is this Francis Holloway? Yes, we have a patient here. Harold Holloway, age 81. He's listed you as his emergency contact. He was dropped off at our ER entrance about 40 minutes ago. He had no insurance card, no ID, and no medications with him. Can you come in? I sat up so fast I knocked my water glass off the nightstand. My grandfather. My pop. Dropped off at an emergency room entrance. Alone. At midnight. On a Friday. I said I'd be there in 20 minutes and I made it in 15. When I got there, he was sitting in a plastic chair in the waiting area, still in his pajamas. Not hospital clothes, his own pajamas, the blue flannel ones I'd given him 2 Christmases ago. He had on one slipper and one sock. His hands were folded in his lap and he was staring at the floor, the way he does when he's trying very hard not to cry. Pop. He looked up and the expression on his face. I can't describe it. Relief and shame all at once, like he'd been caught doing something wrong even though he hadn't done anything at all. Francis, sweetheart, I'm so sorry to bother you. I got down on my knees in front of that plastic chair, right there in the ER waiting room, and I held his hands. They were cold. You could never bother me, I said. You hear me? Never. He nodded, but he didn't quite believe it. I could tell. The nurse at intake told me what had happened. A car had pulled up to the drop-off lane, the one meant for ambulances and emergency arrivals. At approximately 11:05 p.m., a man got out, helped my grandfather out of the passenger seat, walked him to the automatic doors, and left. No conversation with staff, no paperwork, no bag of medications. The security camera got the car's make, but not the full plate because it had pulled away before the guard had a chance to come outside. I knew exactly whose car it was. My Uncle Darren. My mother's younger brother. The one who had been taking care of Pop for the past 14 months. Let me back up because you need to understand how we got here. My grandmother passed 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, fast and brutal. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. Pop was devastated in the way that people who've been married for 53 years get devastated, quietly, completely, like someone had turned a light off inside him. He rattled around their house in Cloverdale for about a year, and my mom and I both tried to check in as much as we could, but I was working full-time at the clinic in Hartwell, and Mom was dealing with her own health stuff, her knee surgeries, the recovery. Then Darren stepped in. To be fair, at first it seemed like a genuine offer. He'd just gone through a divorce, he was between jobs, and he said it made sense. He could move in with Pop, help with the bills, keep him company. Pop seemed relieved. Darren said all the right things. He would manage Pop's finances, just to take the burden off. He'd take him to his appointments. He'd handle the house repairs, the groceries, the whole thing. My mom was grateful. I was cautiously relieved. Pop seemed settled. That was 14 months ago. Over those 14 months, I started noticing things. Small things at first. When I called Pop on Sundays, he seemed distracted, like he was choosing his words carefully. When I offered to visit, there was always a reason it wasn't a great time. Darren was having work done on the house, or Pop wasn't feeling well, or it just wasn't convenient. I drove out twice anyway, unannounced, and both times Darren met me at the door before I could knock and managed the visit so completely that I never had more than 10 minutes alone with Pop. The last time I'd seen Pop before that Friday night was 6 weeks earlier, at my cousin's graduation party. He'd lost weight. He told me his knee had been hurting for months. I asked if he'd seen his orthopedist. He said Darren had canceled the last 2 appointments because of scheduling conflicts. I made a note of that. I make notes of a lot of things. It's a habit from my job. I'm a physician's assistant, and documentation is everything in medicine. I keep a running log in my phone. Dates, observations, things people say. I didn't know yet how important those notes would become. I got Pop checked in properly that night. The ER doctor saw him within an hour. His blood pressure was elevated and he was mildly dehydrated but otherwise physically okay. What concerned the doctor more was that Pop kept apologizing for being there, for taking up a bed, for being a bother. He's very focused on not wanting to cause inconvenience, the doctor told me quietly in the hallway. That kind of thinking in elderly patients can sometimes indicate an environment where they've been made to feel like a burden. I told him I understood. I thanked him. And then I walked to the family bathroom down the hall, locked the door, and stood over the sink for about 2 minutes trying to get my breathing under control. Then I took out my phone and called Darren. He answered on the fourth ring, voice completely flat. Not worried. Not guilty. Flat. I figured you'd call, he said. You dropped him in an ER at midnight, I said, in his pajamas. He needed medical attention. You could have called me. You could have called 911. You could have called 911. You could have called his doctor. Look, Francis, things have been really difficult. He's gotten harder to manage. I can't do this anymore. I saved that recording. I always record my calls. It's legal in my state with one-party consent, and again, documentation. It's just what I do. I told Darren I'd be in touch. He said, whatever, and hung up. That night, after Pop had been admitted for observation and had finally fallen asleep, I sat in the visitor chair beside his bed, and I went through everything I'd saved over the past 14 months. Every note, every canceled appointment, every observation. And then I called the number I'd looked up on my lunch break 3 weeks earlier but hadn't used yet because I'd been hoping I was wrong. Adult Protective Services, 24-hour line. I wasn't wrong. The APS intake worker was calm and professional and asked me to describe the situation from the beginning. I did. I read her my notes. I described the ER drop-off, the missed appointments, the weight loss, the controlled visits, all of it. She told me a caseworker would be assigned within 48 hours, and that I should document everything I could and not interfere with any evidence. I said understood. The next morning, once Pop was awake and had eaten breakfast and his color was better, I sat with him and I asked him quietly if he wanted to talk. He did. What he told me took about an hour, and I held his hand through most of it. Darren had not been paying Pop's bills with Pop's money. He had been paying his own bills with Pop's money. The arrangement had started with Darren being added to Pop's checking account as a joint account holder, ostensibly to make it easier to handle expenses. But over 14 months, Darren had moved money regularly into his own account, not in large chunks that would trigger bank flags, smaller amounts. 800 here, 1,200 there. Pop knew. He'd figured it out about 4 months in, but Darren had told him that if Pop said anything, Darren would have to leave, and then who would take care of Pop? Pop would be alone. Or in a home. Darren had repeated that often enough that Pop had started to believe it was true. Pop's voice when he told me that was so small. He kept saying he didn't want to be a burden. I kept telling him he wasn't. When I asked him approximately how much had been taken, he said he wasn't sure. He didn't have access to his own statements anymore. Darren had taken over managing the mail. I had a sick feeling about the number before I even saw it. I contacted Pop's bank that same day, because I have a medical power of attorney on file. Pop and I had set that up 2 years ago after Grandma died at his request. I had legal standing to request account records. I went in person with the POA documentation and asked to speak with the branch manager. She pulled 14 months of statements. I sat in her office and I did not let myself react while I was reading. I just took pictures of every page with my phone. In the car afterward, I sat in the parking lot for a while. The total was $67,400. Pop's Social Security income comes in at just over $1,800 a month. He also has a pension from 40 years with the County Roads Department, another $11,100 a month. That money was meant to cover his living expenses, his medications, his co-pays, his groceries. Instead, over 14 months, $67,400 of it had been systematically redirected into my uncle's personal account. I called my attorney that afternoon. I've had one on retainer for a few years. It started when I needed help with a contract dispute at the clinic, and I'd kept the relationship going, one of the better decisions I've made. She told me we had enough to pursue civil action for financial elder abuse and to petition the court for a change in guardianship. She also said the documentation I'd compiled, the notes, the call recording, the bank statements, the ER records, was unusually thorough. Most people don't keep records like this, she said. I work in medicine, I told her. Documentation is how you protect people. The next 2 weeks were the most exhausting of my life, including medical school rotations. I'll be honest, they were not clean or straightforward weeks. My mom was devastated in a complicated way. She loves her brother. She felt guilty for not seeing it sooner, and she cycled between grief and fury in a pattern that made it hard to know how to support her. We had some painful conversations. We cried. We said things we later apologized for. It was messy and human and hard. Pop moved in with me the day he was discharged from the hospital. I have a second bedroom that had been functioning as a home office. I moved the desk out, set up a proper bed, made room in the medicine cabinet, and put a nightlight in the hallway. He brought 2 suitcases. He kept apologizing for the imposition. I made him coffee the first morning and put it in the mug he'd given me when I graduated from my PA program, the one that says World's Okayest Kid. And I watched him read the label and laugh for the first time in what felt like forever. I told him this was his home for as long as he wanted it to be. He said he'd try not to be any trouble. I said the next person who used the word trouble in this apartment was getting their coffee privileges revoked. He laughed again, small and real. I'll keep that laugh somewhere safe. The court proceedings took about 6 weeks. I won't walk through all of it, because a lot of it was tedious and procedural, and my attorney handled most of the heavy lifting. But there are a few things worth knowing. Darren's attorney argued that the financial transfers were consensual, that Pop had agreed to them as compensation for Darren's caregiving labor. My attorney introduced the APS report, the bank records, the ER drop-off documentation, and my recorded phone call in which Darren said, with no prompting and no ambiguity, "I can't do this anymore." Not, "I was compensated." Not, "Pop agreed," just flat acknowledgement that he'd walked away. The judge was not impressed by Darren's argument. The court appointed me as Pop's legal guardian. Darren was ordered to repay $67,400 and is currently under criminal investigation for elder financial abuse, which is a felony in this state. I did not pursue the criminal complaint myself. The APS report triggered it independently. I just made sure the documentation was thorough enough that the investigation had something to work with. Darren did not go to jail. Not yet. The criminal process is slower, but he has a court-ordered repayment plan, and more importantly, he has no access to Pop. That's a restraining order, not just an agreement. Paper with a judge's signature. I'm told by my attorney that the criminal case is still active. I check my email. Pop has been living with me for 4 months now. He had his orthopedist appointment 3 weeks after he moved in, first one in almost a year. He has moderate arthritis in his left knee that could have been managed better if the appointments hadn't been skipped. He's now in a physical therapy program, and he complains about the exercises with the dignity that I find genuinely funny. His prescriptions are filled on time, his blood pressure is controlled, he gained back 9 of the 12 pounds he'd lost. He video calls my mom every Sunday morning. Those calls were rocky at first. She needed to apologize to him, and he needed to let her. And neither of them are people who do emotional conversations easily. But they're finding their way back, slowly. Like most real things. He started doing the crossword again. He does the print version, not the app, because he says the app feels like cheating. He leaves the ones he can't figure out on the kitchen table, and I fill them in later without saying anything, and he pretends not to notice. Some mornings I come out of my bedroom and he's already made coffee. He uses too much of it. He makes it strong enough to etch glass. But I drink it without complaining because watching him do something for me, instead of feeling like a burden, is worth whatever my stomach has to say about it. A few weeks ago, I was going through some paperwork at the kitchen table, medical stuff, insurance forms, and Pop was doing his crossword in the armchair by the window. He looked up at some point and just watched me for a second. "Francis," he said. "Yeah, Pop. You didn't have to do all this." I put my pen down and looked at him. He meant it sincerely. He genuinely believes that what I'd done, showing up at the ER, making the calls, sitting in the bank manager's office, filing the paperwork, converting my office into his bedroom, He believed all of that was something I'd done out of some optional sense of duty that he couldn't quite justify. I thought about how to answer him. "Pop," I said, "you drove 4 hours to sit in the waiting room when I had my appendix out at 22. You didn't tell me you were coming, you just showed up." He remembered. I could see it. You sat in that waiting room for 6 hours because they wouldn't let you in until I was out of recovery. And when I finally saw you, you said, I had to stop for a second. You said, "You scared me, kid. Don't do that again." He nodded slowly. "That's what family does," I said. "They show up. They don't calculate whether it's worth the trouble." He looked back at his crossword. He didn't say anything else. But his shoulders dropped in a way that told me something had loosened. That was the moment I knew he was starting to believe it. If you're watching this and you have an older family member whose situation feels off, visits that are managed, calls that seem guarded, weight they shouldn't have lost, appointments that keep getting canceled, please trust that feeling. Contact Adult Protective Services. You can do it anonymously. You don't need proof to make a report. That's what the investigation is for. If there's been financial wrongdoing, contact the bank directly and bring any legal documentation you have. Power of attorney, healthcare proxy, anything. Document everything. Dates, conversations, observations. If your state allows one-party call recording, use it. If you're not sure, look it up before you record anything. And if someone you love is sitting in a waiting room somewhere in their pajamas feeling like a bother, go get them. Don't wait. Don't second-guess yourself. They are not a burden. They never were. Go get them. I've thought a lot about what made the difference in all of this. Not the legal outcome. I mean the moment things actually shifted. And I keep coming back to the same answer. I wrote things down. That sounds small. It's not. When I started keeping notes about Pop, the canceled appointments, the managed visits, the way his voice sounded careful on the phone, I wasn't building a case. I didn't know there was a case to build. I was just doing what I do at work. Because in medicine, you learn early that memory is unreliable, and documentation is the only thing that holds up when it matters. I didn't think of it as protecting him. I thought of it as paying attention. But paying attention turned out to be everything. Darren didn't fail because he got unlucky or because the system happened to catch him. He failed because the harm he was doing left marks, and someone was close enough and clear-eyed enough to record those marks over time. 14 months of small observations. 14 months of writing down what I noticed. That habit. Boring. Unglamorous. The kind of thing that feels pointless until it isn't, is what gave me something to hand the APS intake worker at midnight. It's what gave my attorney something to bring into a courtroom. The actions had consequences because the actions were documented. I think about that when people tell me I did something extraordinary. I don't think I did. I think I did the ordinary things consistently, over a long period of time, when it would have been easier to second-guess myself and let it go. That's not heroism. That's just not giving up on paying attention. There's something about what Darren did that I've had to sit with carefully, because the easy version of this story is that he's simply a villain. And in terms of what he did to Pop, taking $67,400 from an 81-year-old man who trusted him, using isolation as a control mechanism, abandoning him at an ER at midnight, yes, that was wrong in a way I don't feel any need to soften. But the harder truth is that he made choices, one at a time, that compounded. He didn't start by stealing $67,000. He started by getting added to a bank account. Every choice after that was easier because the previous one had gone unchallenged. That's how most harm actually works. Not in one dramatic moment, but in small steps that each feel manageable, each feel like they can be walked back, until they can't. And on the other side of it, that's how most protection works too. Not in one dramatic intervention, but in small, consistent acts of paying attention. Driving out unannounced. Writing down what I noticed. Keeping the phone number saved in my contacts for 3 weeks before I needed it. Staying on the line with Pop even when the calls felt stilted. Pop told me once, a few weeks after he moved in, that he'd been ashamed. Not of Darren, of himself. For not stopping it sooner. For believing that speaking up would cost him more than staying silent. I told him that shame belonged somewhere else entirely, that what happened to him was not a reflection of weakness. It was a reflection of someone exploiting the trust that comes naturally to a person who spent 81 years being decent. His decency was used against him. That's not on him. But I also think about the version of this where no one paid attention, where I'd taken Darren's word for it that the visits weren't convenient, where I'd told myself I was being paranoid. That version exists. It almost happened, and in that version, Pop spends more months in a situation that was slowly taking everything from him: his money, his confidence, his sense of his own worth. I'm not willing to be that version of myself. Not for Pop, not for anyone I love. You don't have to be a physician's assistant to keep a note in your phone. You don't have to have an attorney on retainer to call Adult Protective Services. You just have to be willing to trust what you're seeing and act on it, even when the action feels small, even when you're not sure yet that you're right. Pay attention. Write it down. Show up. That's the whole thing, honestly. That's all of it.